Welcome back to Moonlit Journal. In this video, I wanted to kind of explain how I use my Commonplace and how I commonplace in general. I recently moved into my Olive Traveler's Notebook for my Commonplace. Historically, I've always commonplaced in the same book as my journaling and memory keeping. So in 2024, that was primarily my Hobonichi cousin. And it's always been kind of coupled together with my journal, but I've finally decided to move it into its own space in this traveler's notebook. I kind of touched on this in my 2025 lineup video, but essentially I was finding it hard to keep track of all my Commonplace entries because they have always been housed with my journal entries, which means they've always been in various yearly dated books. And I find that Commonplace entries for me are things that I like to refer to time and time again. So I'm always kind of looking for my old entries, and it gets a little difficult to find them if they're in various dated books and I don't know exactly where they are. And so that's really the reason why I wanted to move it into its own space so that I have like a cohesive, consistent system for my Commonplace where I know that it will always be in one of my traveler's notebooks. I'm sure everyone has a very different way of interacting with their Commonplace and archiving information in general, and that's how I think it should be. I feel like a Commonplace book should be really tailored to its owner's needs. And I've occasionally seen online people saying that, there is a proper way to Commonplace, and traditionally a Commonplace book has been known as like a personal compilation of knowledge, ideas, observations that you collect over time. It dates back all the way to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Scholars used to maintain collections of thoughts and ideas, and they really are meant to serve as repositories for recording and storing information. That is traditionally what a Commonplace book is. I think the way I commonplace is quite similar to that, but I would say I skew more on the personal thoughts and reflections. I do still do a lot of copy text and article copying in my Commonplace. This is a good example. But for the most part, I think I like to record my own reflections, my own interests, more so thoughts of my own rather than thoughts of others, if that makes sense. I know for some people, it's more so copy text or capturing quotes. And not really that personal reflection kind of space. And that makes sense too. I think for each person, it really should act as a guide and it should serve a purpose in your life. So long as the information that you're documenting in your Commonplace is serving you and helping you to accumulate knowledge, or progress personally or grow as a person, I think to me that is what a Commonplace book is meant for. I really see it as a reflection of who I am over time, because a lot of my Commonplace contains entries about my interests, what I'm interested in the moment, what is capturing my attention, what do I want to engage with, what am I curious about and want to learn more about. These are all the things that I really like to document in my Commonplace, and I find that it's really helped me with becoming a more open-minded, a more curious, well-rounded individual who likes to engage with their interests. I think before I had this space and this forum, I guess, for me to document information, I wasn't being very mindful about what I was consuming, and having a Commonplace forces you to be mindful about everything you are engaging with in your life and to really discern whether it's something important enough for you to document or something you deem important enough to document. So in that sense, I find it a really great tool for my own personal growth. But it has also helped me to feel like my life is more meaningful and that the things that I find interesting are worth referencing again and interacting with. So that's how I view my Commonplace book. I thought I could show you some examples in my cousin, and I already started using this week, so I'll also show you kind of the first entries in here. But here's a good example of how I historically have commonplaced. This is an article that I found about the importance of your Saturn return. And this was, when I was 29 years old, I was going through some internal changes, and I had heard about this concept of Saturn return when you're 29 and how it kind of represents that internal growth that a lot of us go through at that time in life. And so it was just a topic that was very relevant to me at the time and that I wanted to learn more about, and just was interested in capturing, I guess. So I copied out the article, and afterwards I wrote a little section of like my reflection on the article. Another example would probably be something like this. A review on a piece of media that I consumed. I watched this show on Netflix earlier this year, and I find that I often gravitate towards shows, books, movies, any kind of media that explores human nature and kind of the psychological and philosophical dilemmas that we face time and time again. So something I really enjoy about looking back on my book and movie reviews is I often find that thread across all of them, that thematically they all follow this same exploration of human nature and morality, and behavior and the patterns that we all fall into and that we often struggle to break out of. And so even though I'm just writing reviews about different pieces of content that I consume, it's interesting to reference it later on and see those themes across all of my entries. That, wow, okay, this is one thing that I clearly always gravitate back to, no matter what it is that I'm engaging with. So hopefully that made sense. But I find it helpful to document my thoughts on different pieces of media and my reviews, because often I am able to find those themes across each. In a weird way, it helps me make sense of my life through studying other people's lives, even if they're fictional people. Here's another example of an artist I really enjoy called Sleep Token, and I'm just reviewing their album that I listened to. So I'm just writing about why it spoke to me, what about this artist I really am drawn to. Here are some quotes from a book I was reading called The Power of Now. I've read it many times. It's written by Eckhart Tolle, and I really find his teachings very beneficial, and I really enjoy his work in general. So I often write about Eckhart Tolle and his teachings. But this is just another example of that. This was a longer quote in his book that I felt I wanted to reference over and over again. So I wanted it documented in my notebook. And here I'm just reflecting on the book in general and on his teachings. So I have a mix of articles, quotes, but also reflections that I have on the things that I'm learning and interacting with. And so it's really a mix of both. And I want to continue that, moving forward, because I find it really beneficial. Here's another entry I had. I showed this, I think, in my first video, just writing about why I love Rosalia and why I admire her so much. So I think a lot of people would consider this as just plain journaling and not necessarily commonplacing, at least something like this where I'm writing about, an artist that I really like, and just kind of geeking out. But the reason I like to include entries like this in my commonplace is really my commonplace is a space for me to document anything and everything that I am interested in and engaging with actively and learning more about. So it's something that's representing me over time, my progression as a person over time. It's a reference point of who I am in this moment. And I like to kind of document how that changes over time, if that makes sense. It also helps me to, like I said, identify those themes that resonate with me over time and find those threads across seemingly like disjointed topics. For example, something I wrote about why I admire Rosalia is this duality that she has to her of embracing both her feminine and masculine side, her strong but sensitive side. It's this embracing of all the aspects of what make us who we are. I feel like she kind of, to me, reinforces that every facet of who you are is beautiful and should be accepted. And I guess similarly, I felt that same way when I was listening to Eternal Sunshine by Ariana Grande. I'm not like a huge Ariana Grande stan or anything like that, but I really enjoyed this album. And I think she's incredibly talented, of course. But kind of the same thing resonated with me about this album. I felt like it was very unapologetic and there was a very clear acceptance of who she is, yet it was very soft and emotional and touched on, not always knowing what to do and not always knowing who you want to be. So that acceptance, I guess, of every facet of who you are is also what drew me to this album. And so that's something that clearly I am interested in across multiple entries, even if they are seemingly very different from one another. So I like to document things like that so I can see those themes over time of what I'm interested in and what I'm learning. Anything that I feel like I've learned from, I like to track in my Commonplace book. And so that's how I currently commonplace. You'll see that I also I like to have a mix of text and images and visuals. I think the visuals really help act as guides for me to kind of quickly summarize what the entry is about. Going back to something that maybe I wrote months or even years ago, the visuals really help place me back again in where I was when I was writing it in the first place. But they also sometimes help visualize the information, especially if it's like health articles. A lot of times I write about the medical conditions that I have in my Commonplace. I look up a lot of articles on chronic migraines, for example. Sometimes it's a little bit dense to just read that as pure text. So anytime I can include graphs or charts or just visualizations of any kind, it also just helps distill the information for me. So I like this visual language and I'm going to carry it forward in my traveler's notebook as well. I do still want it to be primarily text heavy because at the end of the day, I'm going back to these entries to refer to the actual information and I want it to be functional for me. So I don't place a lot of importance on making it look pretty per se. It's more to add some visual elements for ease of comprehension and for helping to remind me of the tone, the mood, or just the subject matter of what I was writing about. So now I have just started to move into this book for my Commonplace, only just this week. So there's not a lot in here to show. This is my Commonplace. I have a key here of the different categories that I write about most commonly. So interests, any copy text or articles that I want to save, any reviews, book, movie reviews, or video games even. Sometimes I review artwork that I see. It's not necessarily reviews, but more so my reflection, I guess, on whatever it is that I consumed. And then I have a vocabulary section just because I'm trying to expand my vocabulary. I always start my books with a little intention here, just written out. So feel free to pause and read that if you're interested. And then these 2 lines, I'm just using that to notate when it's the start of a new entry. So my first entry after the intention here is just a quote from a book that I read recently that resonated with me. Here is an article about PMDD, or premenstrual dysphoric disorder, that I copied down. I struggle with this condition, so I just wanted to learn more about it and educate myself more on what it is, what typically causes it, what are the common symptoms that I can expect, and how is it typically treated. I do this a lot with health issues that I face in general. I just really want to feel like I'm more in control, I guess. If any of you also struggle with any chronic conditions, it can often feel really disheartening, demotivating. It feels a lot of times like you are not in control of your own body. And so being able to write about it and learn about it helps me feel like I'm more in control. So I find it to be a very helpful practice just to write about anything that I'm going through and learn about it, but also to be able to reference this later on as I experience symptoms from time to time. It's just helpful to check back here, like, okay, is that normal? Is that expected? What else can I maybe expect to happen? Yeah, it really helps give me peace of mind to do this, to copy out articles about any health conditions that I have. And then the 1 line here denotes that this is still part of this same entry, but it's my own personal reflection. So this is where the article ends, and then I have my own notes here. If any of you also struggle with PMDD, I feel for you. I'm really sorry. It's not easy to deal with. It's definitely a very disruptive condition to have, so just know you're not alone. I hope you give yourself grace if you do experience this, and that you're taking care of yourself. And that's all I have in here for now. I will start to fill this out as the week goes on.